Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to the folks who are joining from different parts of the world. And today we are gonna, cover macOS lockdown mode. And this is just, my brief introduction. So I work as a security analyst at Salesforce, and I am also a organizing committee member for DFIRWS. And I do enjoy researching on macOS and iOS, dealing with a lot of malware and forensics. And I'm really thankful for Sans for inviting me back. It's really good to be back since I spoke in 2023 DFIR Summit. So thanks for that. And yes, this skipping to the agenda. This is what we are gonna cover today. All about lockdown mode. How do you actually detect it? What are the forensic artifacts? What are some of the caveats and some other stuff? So just a warning on the lockdown mode. So it is a work in progress feature. So, new features are actively implemented and rolled out by Apple. And I'm really looking forward to what is implemented in the new iOS and macOS, which is, I'm still waiting for the public beta to be rolled out and take a look at what new came with the new operating system. So yeah, starting with the introduction on lockdown mode. And so essentially it is a optional feature which any user can enable if the user feels that he or she is actually their device is compromised or they do not feel safe. So what lockdown mode does is once you enable it, the device does not function to its full potential. Some of the features are restricted, mostly Apple related features. The Apple native features are restricted, which reduces the attack surface and in turn gives that security to the user. And it was actually introduced in 2022. It was specifically designed for iOS, but it was also rolled out to the macOS initially. And uh, right now, it is available on 4 operating systems of Apple, specifically iOS, iPadOS, watchOS, and macOS. And the team behind developing and implementing lockdown mode is here. So all thanks to this team for introducing this wonderful feature. So there were a couple of reasons why I got involved into lockdown mode and which sparked my interest. So I'm just gonna share some of those reasons. The first one is obviously since this feature was actually introduced in 2022, but no one was talking about it from the DFIR perspective. So I thought, let me take a look at it. I could only find just one research done on iOS, but nothing on macOS still. So that was a good opportunity for me to actually take a look at it. Then there was this POC done by Jamf on fake lockdown mode, specifically for iOS, but it gave me a very good insight into it. And I thought, why not implement it on macOS? Then there are some lockdown mode vulnerabilities which were fixed. And the most important is the Citizen Labs report. They confirmed that lockdown mode is quite effective on iOS. And this is for the bug bounty enthusiasts. So if you find any bugs in the implementation of lockdown mode, you can get a good amount of bug bounty. So that was some reasons for exploring the lockdown mode. So most of the users will still be wondering, what if I enable it? What actually happens to my macOS? So essentially, it re- restricts not most, but some of the system or application functionality, which includes your FaceTime, your Game Center, your Photos, your Safari, your Mail, your Game Center, and all that stuff. And it also restricts your connectivity options, which includes your AirDrop and Bluetooth. We'll talk about most of it in the later parts of the slides. So the first task was, how do you actually detect if lockdown mode was enabled on the macOS? It was quite a unique problem to solve. I tried my best, and while looking at it, I found out that uh, it is quite hard to actually detect lockdown mode. Why is it actually difficult to actually, detect lockdown mode? So you would not see any pop-ups or banners on your screen, both in the locked and unlocked state. There are no indications in your control center or on your notification pane. So even if it's enabled, you do not get to know that this mode is actually enabled. And if the device is locked, and if you do not know the password of that device, you'll never know that if the lockdown mode is enabled or not. So, no, I my task was actually to detect it. So we can detect it in two different scenarios. One is on the live system, which is quite helpful if you are working in a DFIR or law enforcement setting, wherein we can run just a one-liner script, and there are some indicators on macOS where you can navigate to it and you can easily know that yes, lockdown mode was enabled. Then you can take a look at the artifacts and logs if you have a forensic image of macOS. So the first is, how do you actually detect it on a live machine? So essentially, you're reading the global preferences.p list, and there is a specific key called LDM global enabled. The script is actually reading the content of that key. If the lockdown mode is disabled, you'll see a Boolean value of 0. And if it's enabled, you will see a Boolean value of 1. Then there are some indicators on macOS that you can navigate to, and you can easily find out if lockdown mode was enabled. The first one is going into your settings and privacy and security. And if the lockdown mode is enabled, you will see on, or if it's turned off, it will be shown as off. Yes, moving forward, we have some indicators in the notification pane, wherein this is specifically for a FaceTime call. And if you have the lockdown mode enabled, in certain situations, your FaceTime calls are rejected or blocked by lockdown mode. And this occurs when the caller is not known in the device history, if it's not saved, or if the person is calling for the first time and that contact is not saved in your contact list, lockdown mode will go ahead and block that FaceTime call. You can still see the number which is being blocked, but yes, it will block it on the first time. And if you call on the second time, it will not actually block it. Then there are some game center indications. The first is a normal, game center, what it looks like when the lockdown mode is disabled. And once you enable the lockdown mode, the game center just keeps loading forever and it never stops. So game center is actually disabled with the lockdown mode implementation. Then we have some interesting indicator. If you try to connect your cable using the USB ports on your Mac, or if you try to insert a SD card, you will likely see these two kind of pop-ups and you will have to manually click on allow. Otherwise, those devices, even if it's connected, you'll not be able to actually interact with those devices. And this notification or pop-up will only be seen once the Mac is unlocked. So if you have a locked device and if it's lockdown mode enabled, if you try to connect any of your cable or if you try to insert SD card, it just won't work. Then there are some indications on your Safari browser. Specifically, we have three indicators, which is by default on the starting page, you will always see a lockdown ready mode. And if you try to visit any of the website, and if the lockdown mode is enabled, it will show you with a banner of lockdown enabled. And there is an interesting aspect to this lockdown mode, whitelisting. So you can essentially disable or turn off any of the websites and exclude it from the lockdown mode. So if you have disabled it, you will see a lockdown off banner. So let's jump directly into the forensic artifacts. How does it actually help a forensic analyst if he or she is dealing with a lockdown mode enabled device? You can actually look into mainly two parts. One is the logs, specifically the Apple Unified logs. And there are some files which are created once you enable the lockdown mode. There are some other user account changes as well. And there is some change in the memory as well. The first log is sysdiagnose. The only caveat to it is you have to manually trigger this and you have to go through this manually. You can check the process list, you can check the kickstat, you can check this sysctl, and you can find some artifacts related to lockdown mode in sysdiagnose, but a more comprehensive logging occurs in the Apple Unified logs, and you can see all the actions that are being performed, what is restricted, if you entered the correct password for the lockdown mode or not. So this is the screenshot of a unified log wherein we initiate the lockdown mode. And this is what you see, that the daemon is actually handling all the communications and it is setting the lockdown mode to on condition. And by default, this lockdown mode, once you enable it on your one device, maybe on your macOS or maybe your iOS, all of the other devices connected to your Apple account will automatically get a notification that, hey, lockdown mode was enabled on one of your device. Do you want to enable it on this device as well for maximum protection? You can obviously deny it, but if you feel concerned that you may be a target or you may be compromised, you can turn it on for all of your devices. So this is what the initial lockdown mode enablement looks like under the hood. Then enable the lockdown mode, you have to enter your Mac or iOS password. And if you try, do not enter the correct password, it is actually stored in the login. So from the logs, the analyst can see that yes, the user tried to actually enable the lockdown mode, but it was failed due to the incorrect password. And this is what it looks like once the correct password is provided. Then a very interesting uh, restriction on AirDrop and Bluetooth. So once you enable the lockdown mode, these two are restricted by default for connectivity. The most interesting thing that I found out while testing was even if you as a user, if you want to send a file or photo to your other Apple devices, you can actually send it even if you have enabled the lockdown mode on your device. But if you have it enabled on your device and someone else or you from your other device wants to send it to this device on which the lockdown mode is enabled, if you try to do it, even if you have the airdrop turned on, your device would not show up in the search history if you try to airdrop it. So that's something that you can actually send it, but you cannot receive the files via airdrop. And as a result of lockdown mode, once you enable it, all of your user notifications are cleared. And there's a reason why the notifications are actually cleared is because once you enable the lockdown mode, it will ask you to reboot your machine. And once you do it, once you log back in, all of your notifications are gone. There are some restrictions on Wi-Fi as well if you have the lockdown mode enabled. And if you try to connect to a hotel Wi-Fi wherein there is a captive portal, if you have it enabled, you won't be able to browse to that uh, captive portal and enter your information there. So this protects you from connecting to, untrusted Wi-Fi sources as well. Sometimes it is quite annoying, but yes, lockdown mode provides this kind of privacy. Then we have a profile restriction, wherein if any user tries to install a profile on their machine, the lockdown mode will automatically prevent it and give you with a pop-up that lockdown mode is enabled and you cannot install a profile. This is very common in the terms when some of the macOS malware is involved. So it protects you from those kind of attacks as well. And since lockdown mode is enabled for the Safari browser, and Safari browser depends on the WebKit engine, so the font parsing is actually disabled. So if you have lockdown mode enabled and if you browse on some of the websites via Safari, you will see the font not being parsed correctly and you'll see some weird website UI, all thanks to lockdown mode. Then let's jump on to the forensic artifacts related to lockdown mode. So there are two sets of artifacts. One is the working files, and the second is your actual forensic artifacts. So working files are just essential for lockdown modes working. When you have a plist, you have a executable called lockdown mode D. Then you have something called lockdown.sb, which is the sandbox. So essentially, lockdown mode is sandboxed. This is one of the working file, which just gives you some information about the lockdown mode. If you try to enable it, it will push it to your other devices. There is this lockdown mode d.plist, wherein it says that run at load is no or zero. And as the lockdown mode is a sandbox, it runs in a sandbox environment. You can actually find the sandbox file there. And these two are some of the working, it gives you some information on the version and the information of the lockdown mode, whatever it is used, the build version and the platform version. Coming to the forensic artifacts, the first and the foremost is the global preferences.plist. And you have a key specifically called LDM global enabled. It will be set as no initially if you have not enabled it. And once you enable it, it will be, it changes to yes. Then this is one of the interesting artifact which I encountered while testing with the macOS is um, there is this metadata.plist file, which is always present. And I don't know why, but for some reason, it is always blank. It does not contain any content. But once you enable the lockdown mode, the state.plist file gets into the um, this directory called lockdown mode. And if you disable the lockdown mode, the state.plist just vanishes. This is a very good indication that yes, the lockdown mode was actually enabled. And state.plist has some keys and values wherein it says that the shared albums in the photos is actually disabled. Then your firewall is value is also changing. You cannot receive the AirPlay. The AirDrop discoverable mode is turned off. And AirDrop auto accept is also turned off. So this is a good information on the lockdown modes working. What is it actually restricting? Then let's jump on to the Safari browser. So by default, if you have lockdown mode enabled and if you open the Safari browser, you'll see the banner of lockdown ready. And if you go into the settings in the websites, there is a section for lockdown mode. And we did not configure any website. So this is the default, which any user will see. And once you visit any of the website, in this case, it is reddit.com. If you open the settings for Reddit, you can, by default, uh, all the websites that you visit on Safari is actually lockdown mode enabled, but you can actually disable it. It's a user preference. So once you click on turn off, you'll see a pop-up that, are you sure you want to go ahead with this? And once you click on it as a normal user, this is what you can see. This was me testing. So a user has the freedom to actually decide on what websites he or she wants to turn on the lockdown mode or turn off from it. And this is also recorded in the Safari browser database, which is per site preferences.database. So if the lockdown mode is for that website is enabled, you will see a Boolean value of 1. And if not, you'll see a Boolean value of 0. This is just the larger version of that database. And there are some user account changes. So lockdown mode by default is a per user feature or setting. And it can only be enabled by a admin account. And once an admin account activates it, it is implemented on all the other accounts on that machine, which includes if you have any other admin accounts or any of the other standard users. Interestingly, guest user does not have any effect of the lockdown mode if you enable it. So if you have a standard user account and the lockdown mode is turned on, you will not be able to turn it off unless and until you ask your admin account to actually do it, whoever is operating it. Then there are some changes in the memory, wherein the lockdown mode daemon is loaded to the memory once you restart your machine. Before that, it is not actually loaded. You can actually see the lockdown mode executable in the activity monitor, which is called lockdown mode D. So this is just a overview of what you can see in the activity monitor. You'll see this executable running all the time, even if you have not enabled your lockdown mode. That is just by design. There are some caveats to it, which affects the forensic analysts as well. So the first is in order to enable or uh, disable the lockdown mode, a restart or reboot of that machine is required. So if you are looking at collecting the volatile data, um, no, you'll not be able to do it because if you disable it, you'll have to restart the machine, which will flush out all of your volatile data. Then the USB restricted mode, which is quite interesting, as once you enable it, it will always ask whenever you connect any of the USB accessory to the Mac device, and it only appears when you have the password to that device. If you do not have any password to that device, you'll not be able to connect to the ports for any of the data transfers or maybe forensic imaging. So it affects your data collection or data acquisition process as well. And uh, lockdown mode disables your kernel extension loading and unloading. So if you are using some tools which has a kernel extension which needs to be loaded into the memory, lockdown mode does not allow that. Then there is this profile installation, which is disabled. So if you try to install a profile once the lockdown mode is enabled, you'll see this pop-up saying it cannot be installed because it was prevented. This is particularly helpful if you are using your iOS, and if you want to jailbreak it, always remember to turn off your lockdown mode. Then comes the messages, wherein you can actually see and view all the messages that you have. But if you try to search it, you will not find any results because the searching in the message is disabled. So coming to the conclusion of some of the implications which affect the forensic analysts is it can be used as a anti-forensics technique, although not 100% correct, but yes, it can be used to confuse the analyst who is working on it and who is not aware about this lockdown mode. And currently, since I've tested it, I did not find any digital forensics tool which is able to handle lockdown mode. Maybe in the future it changes. And if your tool depends on installing a profile, let's say your MDM profile, if you're working in some corporate, it prohibits you from installing it. You cannot acquire the data because of uh, different reasons. You have to restart your machine. and because of the USB restricted mode, and because of the kernel extension loading is actually disabled, which affects your tool functionality. Then coming to the interesting question, which some of the folks who were interested in lockdown mode, they asked me this thing, and I thought about looking into it, saying, is lockdown mode really effective against macOS? The first question is, it was actually designed for iOS, but since it was shipped to macOS and we see a rise in the macOS malwares, macOS stealers currently, this is quite relevant question. And this is what I found, that lockdown mode can prevent the attacks to a certain extent after it is enabled. But if it's not enabled, uh, there is no way to actually prevent the attack. And the lockdown mode does not take any proactive actions, saying if your device is already infected and you enable the lockdown mode, it does not actually do with the malware execution or detection side. So that is something which needs to be implemented. What the trends of the macOS malware, what we are seeing right now. But yes, it can be improved, and it has to be implemented by Apple. So yes, this is what I found out till now. And I'd like to uh, thank Magnet Forensics and Summary for providing their tool for my research. And these are some of the references that I've used, which you'll also find it interesting to look at it. And I'd like to say thank you for listening to me. It was a pleasure to share my research with a wider DFIR community. And I'm open to questions if there are any.